Recently, I've been thinking a little bit more about the two different, dimensions, the two different sides to the book series that I've been working on. In case you haven't watched my other videos, I will explain that my book series is about this sort of futuristic dystopia that's in the United States, which is, in the first book, is governed by a group of corrupt intellectuals, really violent intellectuals actually, named Griffith Alliance, who are eventually massacred by the protagonist, the hero, Dmitri. But they follow in the footsteps of this evil aristocracy that goes all the way back to Iceland originally it was the 12th century, but I'm thinking of changing that to something more recent, like 19th century, given that a lot of the social and political climate of that world seems too modern for that era. And I think that, as a writer, that was a mistake that I made, and I have to find some way of fixing that. But that aside, that evil aristocracy that existed centuries ago, governed by a huge part of it was John Rowe, and the book series is actually called The Fall of John Rowe because this is his eventual downfall, and he is one of the debauched noblemen who committed crimes against children. I mean, not like unspeakable kinds of crimes, and was responsible for. Well, the key thing here I want to talk about is destitution. Is that he dragged Edmund's town into destitution through heavy rents and agricultural labor. And because of that, the result was, of course, depopulation. That there was a group of choir boys who attended this opera house called Greenbury Opera House that is ideologically a very different faction than John Rowe. It's working against John Rowe. So he's against the entire musical industry. But these choir boys that died of tuberculosis, which was undoubtedly induced by the destitution that they were living in. So much later on in year 2400, in this sort of futuristic society of the United States, these political factions are still at war with each other. Of the artistic world, which in Dimitri's case is not the musical industry, like it was when John Rowe was alive, but it was more of a mixture of different things: poetry, paintings, and there was a mystical movement that, like the hero Edmund, on John Rowe's time, Dmitri was also a part of that movement that was working against this sort of pseudo-intellectualism and this brutality. But I want to get into a little bit more of the issue of destitution and depopulation. Because, first off, I think that a lot of this political stuff, a lot of the political stuff that's at work in the novel, has been a way that I've been trying to ground it. Because I think a huge pitfall, a huge weakness in a lot of my writing can obviously be that it can become too dreamy sometimes and too abstract, as I mentioned before. So I'm trying to find that way of showing life in a more idealized way, and also in a somewhat surreal and a more theatrical way, but have it the politics help my brain stay grounded in cause and effect, because that's ultimately what politics is all about. And it's also about, there's more complexities underneath that too, the very chaotic complexities of duplicitous personalities, double speak, wordplay, sophistry. I mean, those are some of the things I talked about in the last video. And all of these things actually can aid the dreamlike atmosphere of this story in a way that brings it to life, and it doesn't become its own sort of cliche. It doesn't become like those symbolist poets that don't really seem to have any form or structure to their storytelling or their narrative. And so I think the political stuff regarding the destitution also ties into themes that you see in many other novels of Scrooge, as I've quoted Scrooge before in The Christmas Carol, when he says that as long as we can decrease the surplus of the population, or something to that effect, when he's justifying his own horrible actions at the beginning of the novel. Or or what else? or even in these fairy tales like It's a Wonderful Life. I mean, that corrupt character, Mr. Potter. I'm pretty sure he'd be happy to have many people die off as a result of many of his crimes against his financial crimes against his own community. I'm sure that is the ultimate goal. But I think it also ties into a much bigger issue that I would say is the underlying, like the most important thing, which is the issue of nihilism and nihilism, empiricism, and the ways that they can make life seem ultimately mechanical and soulless, but that becomes an ideology that kind of softens people's desire or ambition or courage to want to change or do anything about the situation. And so, for example, this is the way in which I try to combine the dreaminess with the politics of the story. And there's one nightmare that the character, I believe it's actually one of the singers has in my second book of my book series. She's one of the singers. Her name is Monica. She works at the opera house that is under attack ideologically and soon to be under attack physically. And she has a nightmare about one of the choir boys who had died of tuberculosis. And she had sat like right next to his bed in the manor where he lives when he's about to die. And there's a kind of, I imagine, I'm still editing it, but there's a kind of wistful indifference, I guess, or a kind of a sense of finally giving in and not having any will to fight or any even will to survive anymore. And that's pretty much, I think, the scariest thing about this scene. And that's the thing that continues to haunt her for the rest of the story. And this again brings me back to what I was saying earlier about the depopulation and also the kind of, I guess, not really, I mean, I was going to say that it was about artificially creating two different sides, except that in reality, it's even more complicated than that. In the book series, the faction who are the heroes, have a genuine desire for change. They're not just a kind of controlled opposition, which could indeed be the fear among some people that any kind of movement can become a kind of controlled opposition or can lose its authenticity. But the one thing I can say about this movement is that it never does.